Hi, I'm Rachel Jussack, instructor of bassoon at Westfield State University. I'm also the second bassoon with the Boston Lyric Opera, Cape Symphony, and New Bedford Symphony. In this video, I'll walk you through some tips that will help you prepare for the upcoming district band and orchestra audition. Our solo is Sonata in A minor by Benedetto Marcello. He was an Italian composer during what is known as the Baroque era. While this sonata was not originally written for the bassoon, we have taken it into our repertoire along with many other bass clef instruments. If you search for recordings of this piece, you will most likely find recordings of other instruments, like trombone, string bass, or cello. So the first topic I want to talk about in this solo is subdividing and establishing a tempo. An adagio, as this first movement is marked, should be slow with a relaxed feel, but not so slow that we have a hard time feeling the melodic line. I recommend starting to learn this one with the metronome on the 8th note. I will demonstrate that for you now. My metronome is at 8th note 70. This movement at first glance looks like a lot of notes, but don't be fooled. The tempo is marked quite slow, and many of these rhythms are similar ones you have encountered before. They're just written with smaller note values. Make sure to pay careful attention to when the rhythms are dotted versus straight, and when they are marked as 16th notes versus 8th notes. Frequently, I will mark in my music the outline of the big beats to help my eyes stay on track. Once you become comfortable playing with the 8th note subdivision, you can also put the metronome on the quarter note to practice, creating a longer musical line. I will demonstrate this for you now. My metronome is at 40. The next topic I want to talk about are trills. You might notice that there are some trills in this piece. All trills should start from the note above. What does that mean? Well, when you trill a note, it means you move between two notes very quickly. In music from this era, we typically start the trill on the printed note and move up a step, like this. During the Baroque era, it was common practice to do the opposite, like this. A trill is an ornament used to add flair and embellishment to a piece of music. In order to give the proper effect without distracting from the musical line, your trills must move evenly between the two notes and within the indicated rhythm on the page. I recommend learning the rhythm first without the trill to help you hear the structure in which the trill fits. And make sure you don't play the trill out of time. Practice the motion between the two notes with a metronome, starting at a slow speed, let's say quarter note 60. Keep the motion between the two notes comfortable and practice speeding up that motion gradually with time. If your fingers are tensing, then you're going too fast, too soon, and need to slow down. If you try to learn with tension in your hands, you will never learn to play it from a point of ease, so work smarter, not harder. I will demonstrate this now. All right, next let's move on to the allegro, the fourth movement. The last movement of the sonata is named allegro, which at a basic level can be interpreted as fast. A better interpretation is lively or cheerful. The reason I prefer this translation is because it not only gives you an indication of the tempo, but also tells you the character and style of the music. Anybody can play fast, but not everyone has the patience to play musically and fast. Imagine someone speaking to you in a robotic voice versus naturally. One sounds flat and harsh, while the other has a natural rise and fall to the cadence of their words. This is the same with music, which is why speed alone is not the answer. So with fast movements, we're going to talk about slow practicing. If you haven't figured it out already, I love slow practicing. When we practice slowly, it allows us to absorb more information and multitask better. It might be boring, but starting slow builds a stronger technical foundation, therefore helping you play faster and cleaner. Start with the eighth note at around 60 on your metronome. Work in sections, and then slowly connect them as you go. I will demonstrate this now. You can take 2 measures or 4 measures at a time, whichever is easy for you to absorb without becoming overwhelmed. Now we're going to talk about trills again. Since the trills in this movement occur in a faster setting, it is important to make sure they are clear. Otherwise, you risk sounding like a jumble of noise. Typically, when trills happen faster, students move off the first note too soon. Remember to play the start of the trill with intention, so the beginning pitch doesn't get swallowed. I will demonstrate this now. Next, let's talk about dynamics. The dynamics are arranged in a pretty logical way in this movement. Basically, when the musical line goes up, you crescendo, and when it goes down, you diminuendo. You can see that there are sequences, or passages, that are repeated multiple times, moving upward in motion. Each motion upward can be an increase in volume. Make sure you plan your dynamics. Figure out how soft you want to start and how strong you want to end, so the increase in volume sounds organic. This starts in measure 5 of the Allegro, if you want to follow along. We have the first sequence. Second one is exactly the same, but it goes up a step. So therefore, we'll play it a little louder. Up another step, so a little louder. And then we are at forte, which is our maximum volume. All right, and then we go down, and so we start to relax in our volume a little bit. Let's talk about scales. Scales are the easiest place to get points during your audition. Many students focus on playing their scales fast instead of focusing on the overall accuracy of the scale. 9 times out of 10, if you can play your scales with the correct notes and at a controlled pace, you will score higher than if you try to go for speed. I always start my scales slowly. What a surprise. This helps build a strong foundation in all areas of my playing and allows me to really listen to how I can improve what I'm doing. So as you go higher in range on the bassoon, some of the fingerings can be weird and hard to remember. In order to practice and retain what you've done, it is imperative that you follow a certain protocol. This goes for anything you're learning, actually, not just scales. Playing a passage, long or short, 3 times in a row and accurately will begin to create long-term retention. The more often you practice this way, the stronger and more predictable your playing will become. This is especially important when you're practicing the higher note fingerings. You want to create a smooth transition throughout the scale. First, practice by playing the note you find challenging. Then play the note that precedes it. Take your time in between each note and only play when you're positive that your hands are set up for the correct pitch. Eventually, the pause between the two notes will become less and less as the motion becomes easier. Once you feel confident that the new fingering has been properly learned, you can practice the same technique by adding the next note up the scale. So let's say I'm playing a C major scale. And let's say, for example, the note I'm having a problem with is G, the one right at the top of the staff. Let's say it's cracking, and I want to work on improving that. So I'm identifying that as my problem note. So first, I'm going to just play my G 3 times cleanly in a row. Notice how I take a little pause between each time I do it. That way I'm doing it with intention, and I'm making sure I'm aware of how I'm playing everything, how I'm placing my tongue, how I'm using my air, so I'm not just playing this on repeat mindlessly. That's very important. So now that I've played the G 3 times correctly in a row, I'm gonna start on the F right below it and practice moving from F to G 3 times correctly in a row. I might move from G to A and do the same thing. And once I do that well, I'll put it back in the whole scale and see how it works in the bigger picture. Another challenge is your chromatic scale. You can lose track of where you are in the scale sometimes. My suggestion for practicing this chromatic scale is to work one triplet at a time, including the first note of the next triplet. Repeat each triplet several times, slowly and cleanly, before moving on to the next one. Next, practice larger groupings like 2 triplets or 4 triplets. Really focus on the first note of each triplet and use them as a type of visual and musical anchor to stay focused for when you put the entire scale together. So let's imagine each of those separate groupings I did 3 times in a row before I moved on. Assuming I've done that cleanly, I'll then go put it back in the bigger picture, like this. Notice how I kept the same slow tempo. I didn't immediately speed up when I put it back into the bigger picture. That's important. All right, lastly, sight reading. Practice sight reading. The only way to get better at sight reading is to do it. Do a little bit every day using etude books, chamber music, solo repertoire, ensemble music, Sight Reading Factory, which is an online program, anything. There is an endless supply of music and online resources out there. Playing duets is also a great way to work on this skill. I like to record my sight reading so that I can go back and listen to how I did and make notes for next time. When you prepare to sight read, make sure you check out all the important information the music gives you before you play. Look at the key signature. Are there sharps? Are there flats? The time signature. The tempo. Is it fast? Is it slow? Check for accidentals, rhythmic challenges, and articulation markings. Paying attention to these directions will prepare you for a more successful reading. Scan the passage to see if there are any areas that look particularly challenging or confusing. Once you've scanned for all of these things, find the hardest looking spot, think about how fast you can play it while still being successful, and start at that tempo. This process might be slow at first, but with time, your brain will get used to scanning and absorbing the information and retain it better as you play. Thank you so much for checking out this video. I hope that these tips were helpful, and good luck at your audition. We can't wait to see you at Westfield State. Now go practice.